Not long ago, not far away, today's story sees Oliver again in his Nana and Grandad's house, but this time with his cousin Amy. They are playing in the bedroom with some toys. Oliver is telling Amy all about his adventure, and Amy, of course, didn't believe a word of it. She thought he was making it all up. But while they were sitting there discussing it, him saying yes it happened, and her saying, oh no, don't be silly, things like that don't happen, the door swung closed all by itself, and with an audible click it closed solid. Oliver's eyes opened wide as he looked at the door. Amy looked at him and thought he was joking. Then she turned to see the door change colour. It changed through all the colours of the rainbow, sparkling, bright, and then it stopped. This time it was a bright red door. Oliver ran over and said, come, quick, you'll see what I was talking about. And he opened the door, expecting to see a big wide field. But not this time. The big wide field wasn't there, but neither was the landing at the top of the stairs. Oh no. This time the door had opened into a very dense forest. Oliver jumped out through the door and went, come on, quick, let's go see what's happening. Amy was a bit wary, she was afraid, but Oliver convinced her to step out. And he said, look over there. And there was a cauldron that looked like you see in the old Halloween tales that witches had. It had 3 legs, big round belly and a lip. Either side there were 2 great handles with what looked like rope or string wrapped around them. Oliver thought it was going to be heavy and went to pick it up, but it was much lighter than he assumed, and he almost threw it in the air. And Amy said, leave that alone, and ran to him. And then she turned and looked at the door, and it began to go sparkly and bright and change colour and turn to smoke. Amy said, now look what you've done. You got us stuck here. And he went, it's okay. Then they heard the most horrible sound you've ever heard, frightening both of them. But then Oliver realised where he was and thought, oh, it's probably the dragon. And Amy said, dragon? And he went, yeah, come on quick, he's very nice. And they went through the woods, and then they found a clearing. But what they saw wasn't what Oliver expected. Yes, there was a dragon, but this wasn't the same dragon as Oliver had seen before. This dragon was slightly smaller, but definitely had a much more aggressive face. They both peeked around from behind the trees, afraid to go any closer, because this dragon seemed like it was in great pain. It had wounds all down its side and was bleeding quite heavily, though they weren't quite sure if it was blood or not, because they'd never seen purple blood before. And then a voice came to their heads. It seemed like it was all around them, but yet it was inside their head. They both heard it, so it wasn't imagination. And the voice said, who are you? Have you come to take the last of my children? And Amy said, no, we're not here to take anybody's children. And the dragon said, if you come nearer, I'll kill you. And Oliver said, you're not like the dragon I've seen before. We'll go, don't worry, we'll leave. And then the dragon looked deep inside their minds and said, no, don't leave. You are the type of people that will help me. So they very tentatively walked forward, and the dragon lifted her weary head and said, there is but one left. And she looked towards what looked like a fire pit, all black with smoke coming from it. And in the pit they could see 5 broken eggshells, and one slightly smaller than the rest, but it was still intact. As they moved closer, the heat from the pit pushed them back a little bit because it was surprisingly warm. And Oliver said, how are we supposed to do that? What are we supposed to do? And she said, if we'll leave it there, now that I can't keep it warm, it'll die. You must bring it up the mountain, up to where the lava lies, and put it somewhere warm and safe, away from flowing lava. And Oliver said, but we can't pick that up. It'll burn us. We're not dragons, we don't have scales like you. And she said, "You'll find a way." And Amy thought, the pot, the funny witch's pot. So they both ran back down the track and found the pot, picked it up and ran back, each one holding a handle. When they got there, they used sticks to gently prise the egg out and put it into the pot. And then she said, "It'll die, you must keep it warm." So they put hot stones around it from the fire pit. And they said, "Which way?" And the voice thundered in their head, "Go that way." So they walked through the forest and it gradually began to climb. It was very tough. There was sticks and brambles and they were getting cut, their clothes was getting ripped, eventually leaving the forest and then finding themselves in scrubland with gorse or something like gorse as high as their waists. They pushed through it, hoping that it wouldn't get too heavy because the pot was now getting heavier and heavier because they'd been carrying it for quite some time. But eventually even the gorse gave way, and in front of them there was a landscape of black newly formed lava. When they tried to put their foot on it, their shoe began to melt, so they had to pull it away quickly. They could see where they needed to get to, higher up the mountain, but where they were, the lava was still extremely hot. So they moved off to one side and started to go round the side of the mountain to see if they could find an older way. But then Oliver said, "Well, if we keep having to put one of our shoes on the rock to see if it's cool, we will have no shoes left." So Amy thought, what would they do? They pulled some leaves from the gorse, and every time they wanted to find out, they would throw one of the leaves onto the rock. If it seemed to shrivel and smoke, obviously it was hot. So eventually, after some long distance, with their precious cargo seeming to get heavier and heavier, eventually they made it to a point where the leaf didn't shrivel. So Oliver put his hand over the stone and brought it slowly closer and closer and closer, but he couldn't feel any heat. So they thought, well, we'll move slowly, but let's go this way. Then they noticed that this lava wasn't as black and shiny as the other was. It looked kind of slightly grey because of dust that was on the top. So obviously it was a lot older. So they followed the dustier stone as high up as they could go. Eventually they came to a point where there was a shaft, and in this shaft there was flowing lava. They could see it below them, the heat almost scorching their hair. So they moved a little bit away to where the ground was extremely warm from the heat of the lava underneath it. And in a little crevice that he thought looked reasonably cozy, they gently rolled the egg and its protective stones into this little crevice. Using the stick that was still in the pot, they pushed the stones and covered it so that it couldn't be seen from the air. And then they made their way back down. They had gone some 300-400 yards when Oliver turned to Amy and said, "Amy, why are we still carrying this darn pot?" And they went, "Oh, yeah." So they threw the pot away, which made the journey a lot easier, because now they could use both the hands to balance themselves as they went down the hill. Eventually they came back onto the gorse, and then they realised, how far around the mountain have we come? They weren't quite sure. Below they could see the forest, but they weren't quite sure at what point they entered. So they walked around the edge a bit, and then Oliver noticed on the edge of a black rock he could see the burnt remains of a footprint. This must be where you stood there first. Let's go down this way. So they turned and went further down the hill, back through the gorse, which they knew was right because they could see their trails through it. So they followed their own trail back down the hill and into the forest. And then they made their way as straight as they possibly could through the trees, down towards the valley where the dragon lay. When they got there, the broken eggs were there. The pit, still hot and smouldering, was there. An indentation in the ground where the dragon lay, but no dragon. They couldn't see any marks or any sign that the dragon had crawled off. They called out, but no voice came back to their heads. So they thought, maybe we should go back to where the door was. But as they went to go through, the gap between the trees seemed to fill with smoke, and the smoke slowly became denser and denser and started to flash all the colours of the rainbow, rolling through red, blue, green, yellow, orange, every other shade you could possibly think of, and then some more, until eventually in front of them was a bright green door. Oliver said, I'm sure the door we came through was red, and Amy said, it's a door, let's go. They opened the door and found themselves looking into a hallway, a long passageway leading from where to where they didn't know. But all along there were doors of all different colours. So they stepped out and the door closed by itself. Then they heard somebody approach. They didn't know whether to run or stay. But Oliver said, this reminds me of the place I was in before. Maybe it's the king of the doors. And true enough, down the corridor came a tall man with a long coat. The coat had little designs on it resembling doors, and each one flashed a different colour. It almost made you feel dizzy because it was so mesmerising. And he came down and said, thank you again, Oliver. I see you've brought a friend. Come, let me clean you up. And he led them down to a door that this time was white, bright, shining, dazzling white. He opened the door and told the children to enter. They went in, and as soon as the door clicked behind them, their hair began to stand on end like if it was electrified, and all the dirt and dust of the previous exertions all lifted off the body. Somehow the tears from the bramble seemed to repair themselves. Their clothes was better, their skin was better. The only thing that was wrong was their shoes. Where they got burned, they were still burned. Eventually the door opened again and the king bade them come out. They walked out along the corridor and back into the great round hall with the raised centre with the great big chair on the top. The king walked up, sat on the chair, and the children followed, standing one either side. Oliver said to Amy in a low voice, hold on to the chair, you may get dizzy. And the room began to move and spin. Eventually it stopped, and the king led them down the steps towards the door. He opened the door and another great long hallway lay in front of them. They walked down and eventually they saw a bright red door of exactly the same colour. They walked through the door. The king said, this time I won't say goodbye just yet. He said, may I have your shoes? And they looked and thought, this is funny. But they didn't argue. They just took their shoes off, but they were black and burned. Though they hadn't melted as badly as the first time Amy tread on the black lava, still the heat all the way up had damaged the shoes. Oliver only then noticed that the shoelaces, which he never ever tied, were usually flapping around, were quite black in places. So as he bent down, he pulled one little bit of the end of the black burnt shoelace off and hid it in his hand. They both took off the shoes and handed them to the tall king on the other side of the door. And then, from seemingly nowhere, he handed them two pairs of shoes, exactly the same as theirs, with one main difference. These looked better than new. They thanked him, put the shoes down, and as they turned back to see him, to say goodbye, the door closed. The door began to sparkle and change colour, from red through all the colours of the rainbow, again back to white. A plain white bedroom door. Oliver said to Amy, open the door, let's see what's outside. They opened the door, and what was outside was, as you would expect, the landing at the top of the stairs, with the doors to the other bedrooms and the bathroom. Oliver was about to run downstairs to tell his grandmother and grandfather what had happened, and this time he had a witness, and Amy pulled him back and said, no, maybe we should keep this to ourselves. And Oliver said, it did happen, didn't it? And Amy said, I think so. Then Oliver slowly turned his hand over and opened it, and in his hand was a little burnt piece of shoelace. And he smiled at Amy and said, yes, it happened. Look, let's see where the next story goes to. Hope you enjoyed. If you like, please like, and good night.